there is a lot to consider as this case moves forward. That is why we are welcoming back to the show Michigan attorney Jamie White for his insight on the ongoing case. Welcome back to Good Day, Jamie.
Thanks for having me.
So with the teachers reporting it the day of the shooting and all these factors leading into the counselor warning the parents about what was going on, how do you think this is going to play into James Crumbley's trial?
Well, the strategy for the defense is pretty clear. They're trying to show that other people who were in position of authority, had some knowledge that the propensity of this kid was violent. And if they didn't do anything, then how can you expect Mr. Crumbley to do anything? I think that it's the only thing they have to argue, but I think it's going to fall on deaf ears with the jury. You know, as we talked, I think a couple of months ago, the general rule of thumb is you do not have a duty. Duty is a legal termination, and you do not have a duty to protect third parties, right? So if you see somebody being robbed, by law, you do not have a duty to call the police. Now, that duty becomes reality when you have a child, or you have a child in your stead, or you're a doctor and you have a patient, and so on and so on. So the argument's going to become that these folks, while they did have a duty, arguably legally, it certainly doesn't rise to the level of Mr. Crumbley. Now, I will say, having watched that testimony yesterday, I live in a jurisdiction, pretty much adjacent to Oakland County, and they've closed our school down at least 4 or 5 times in the last year for just the most minuscule of threats, some of them anonymous, some children acting out, to the point where, it's become belabored almost. And so the fact that nothing was done by the school is a different issue. And I suspect that schools all over the country are reanalyzing their processes as it pertains to children that they deem to be a threat.
Jamie, I'm curious, obviously, with Jennifer Crumbley's conviction on 4 counts here recently, how that you think will play into the mind of the jury, or at least those who claim to be aware of the trial and what had actually happened, versus maybe on the flip side, how the defense can make a different argument or see maybe flaws in that case and try to prevent a conviction for James this time around?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, there's a lot of speculation about what the defense is going to do when it's time to present their case. As far as people not knowing about this case, I think is not realistic. And I think one of the issues that we're going to see on appeal from Mrs. Crumbley and Mr. Crumbley in the event he's convicted is that there should have been a change of venue. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think that's one of the issues that we're going to see. One interesting point of fact that we'll see, the defense could call Jennifer Crumbley. She's already been sentenced. She's already been convicted. And therefore, she can't be charged again for the same crime unless she were to admit something above and beyond what occurred.
Sure.
And, so from a defensive point of view, I don't know what the relationship is between the attorneys and the parties at this point in time, but they could call Jennifer Crumbley to take the rap, so to speak, and relieve Mr. Crumbley of some of his liability. That would not shock me.
Now, something that got me curious that you said earlier, Jamie, is so when the school's dealing with issues such as this, such as the counselor that took the witness stand, it seems like they contacted the parents, they let the parents know everything that was going on, they gave some suggestions, but it seems like beyond that, in today's just political educational climate, that's about as far as the school could go without taking some liability and responsibility onto themselves for what were to then happen. What can a school do in these cases? Because you mentioned since this has happened, any whiff of violence in schools shut down because they want to be proactive in preventing this happening again. But what could they have done in retrospect more than they did, because based upon the witness's testimony, they contacted the parents, he stayed with them, he made sure he wasn't alone. What more is the school responsible for doing here?
You know, so the school, I think the school did a fantastic job as far as bringing the appropriate people in the loop and really continuing to bring the potential threat to the attention of the counselor. But the school has ultimate authority of who can and cannot attend their schools. There has to be some basis. It can't be based on race or gender or, that sort of thing. But school boards are very powerful when it comes to who can and cannot attend their school. I mean, there is no freedom of speech in school. If a kid writes something in a school newspaper that the school doesn't like, they can shred it and not print it. So the authority is broad. Hindsight's 2020, of course.
Of course.
But they certainly have the authority to remove students who are potential threats. Most school districts, I'm not sure about Oxford, but most school districts have alternative programming and online programming for people who are deemed not functional.
Gotcha.
Jamie, less than 30 seconds here, so real short answer. I was just trying to put myself in the mind of a juror, and you don't necessarily have to take every single example at face value, but whether it's the drawing of a weapon on an assignment compared to dad knowing that he had a gun or access to a gun and not saying anything. I mean, all different range of things that a juror might be paying attention to. Lastly, real quickly, Jamie, what stands out to you?
Well, one thing that stands out to me that isn't talked about very much is that they purchased a weapon for somebody who isn't eligible to have one. I guess they can argue it was their weapon, but they have said over and over again they purchased this for their son, and I think that was completely inappropriate and illegal. The behavior here, I think that people are fed up with this nonsense of school shootings. A lot of talk has been had about it being a gun community. I'm a gun owner. I feel I'm a very responsible gun owner, and I suspect many jurors are going to be offended by the loosey-goosey nature of how this weapon was kept, and I think he will be convicted.
Jamie, really appreciate your insight. Hope to have you back here again in the coming weeks. Attorney Jamie White with us on Good Day. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jamie.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.